Now, of course, you have your own personal history with that as a child, right?
That's correct.
And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, my dad came from an abusive family. He was beaten physically. My mom was emotionally abused, neglected mostly, I think. And so as a child, I was spanked quite regularly. Um, I honestly, I don't know when it started, and I don't even know when it ended. For sure, it ended by the time I was 10 or 12 or 13 years old, maybe. Probably roughly around the time my parents got divorced, which I think was around 11 years old or something like that.
Right.
No, maybe 13, right around that time anyway. So yeah, I was spanked. Discipline was basically you do as you're told, or there's going to be punishment, and the punishment
Yeah.
was whatever it was that I hated. That's what the punishment was, which was spanking or being screamed at or being forced into my room. I remember one
So it's this
time.
weird, you experience this weird kind of anti-empathy, right? It's like my parents understand my needs only insofar as they can use them against me.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, but
Right.
at the same time, there was like this sort of affection that they would also give me. So, I mean, as a child, you latch on to your parents and you crave the affection, and so I did. But then also there was that mean, nasty side.
Right.
And
Right.
I
Which
remember,
is, I mean, not uncommon, right?
yeah,
I
sure,
mean, it's like saying, well, I was addicted to heroin and there were never any highs. It's like, well, no, I mean, the whole part of the point of addiction is you're chasing the high and escaping the low, right? It's the two things that you need. And so parents who never have any warmth or affection tend not to be very good at creating those kinds of, not creating like consciously or willfully, but they tend not to be very good at abuse, if that makes any sense.
sure,
I mean,
yeah,
nobody gets addicted to baking soda, right? Because I hear the high sucks. Right. So I sort of want to just point that out that the idea that, well, there was this abuse, but on the other hand, there was all this, right, great stuff, right? I mean, a lot of abusive marriages, that the makeup sex is mind blowing, right? I mean, that there's so much passion and so much storm and stress and all that that a lot of times there's this. I mean, you can see this in A Streetcar Named Desire. That there's this sexual chemistry that goes along with aggression and abuse that is very primal, right? It's obviously very simian in a lot of ways, but not to say it's not very powerful. So I mean, I just wanted to point out that it's not like, well, there was this stuff, but on the other hand, it's like, well, it's almost like the same hand, if that makes sense. I mean, there has to be this positive stuff, otherwise the abuse doesn't really work as well. And I'm not saying the whole point of it was abuse or anything like that, but I think I get that. I sort of understand that.
okay. Well, I also wanted to add another experience that I think is pretty important, and I think it happened more than once. I had done something, I don't even know what, something supposedly I had misbehaved, and my parents sent me to my room, and I just remember crying and crying and crying. And there was this rule. I was a 10 minutes in my room, but it had to be 10 minutes of silence. And if I tried to open the door, the timer would reset. If I asked how much time was left, the timer would reset. If I cried, the timer would reset. I'm sorry. Just
No,
feeling.
go ahead. It's all right. It's all right.
And so now
So
I
there's sort of an
haven't.
impossible situation because you're put in a situation where your feelings are incredibly negative and incredibly strong, but at the same time, you are not allowed to express those feelings, right?
Exactly.
It's like me basically putting a hot iron down on your forehead and saying, don't flinch.
Pretty much.
I don't want to get off on a rant here, right? But I hate therapy speak. And people, you can see people who've gone to crappy counseling, like, yeah, I just want to give you your space. I want to give you your boundaries, right? I'm like,
Yeah,
what does
that's
that even,
he's
I don't know what
totally all.
boundaries mean, and right?
Yeah, he's all over that kind of crap.
Yeah, so it's like, well, I wasn't there for them and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, none of those are actually, like, I want the meaty base of the brain, two balls in your hand, simian emotion speak, right? Right. The fact that he's been like a distant and unavailable father has broken your heart in significant ways, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's hampered your capacity to be an effective parent in a lot of ways. You were emotionally tortured. Listen, I'm telling you, man, scaring and punishing a kid and then saying, I'm going to punish you further if you express unhappiness. It's sheer emotional torture. I'm not using that phrase metaphorically. It is emotional torture. It's one thing to hit someone. It's another thing to hit someone and say, I'm going to hit you again if you get upset at me hitting you the first time. The first is aggression, but the second is sadism, right? It's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just to think that my dad tortured me. I mean, what an asshole.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that. Now, see, that's a non-therapy talk phrase, right? Which is, I think important. It is. I'm going to reset the timer, right? It's one thing to lash out. I'm not defending lashing out, and it's one thing to lash out and hit your kid, or I mean, that's terrible enough. But then this cold-eyed sadistic calculation of, oh yeah, now we're going to set a fucking timer. And if you make a sound, and if you try and get out of your room, and if we hear you crying, that timer gets reset, right? That's calculated. That's not a crime of passion. That is a premeditated crime. That's not manslaughter. That's first degree. That's planning. That's calculation. There's a whole theory. And that's not the heat of the moment, right? The heat of the moment is bad enough. And I say this because, I mean, I have talked a lot about my mom, but the reality, and I've said before, vicious, cruel, absolutely. Raging crazy, absolutely. Sadist? No. No. She lashed out, but she did not emotionally torture. So I am sort of aware of the difference. And this, I am going to turn the thumb screws on you, and I'm going to turn them tighter if you express or show any pain. I mean, that's Nazi, right? That's not Charles Manson. That's Joseph Goebbels, in my opinion.
It's pretty screwed up.
It is, right? But tell me what you're feeling at this point, if you don't mind.
Just trying to take in what you're saying and internalize. I mean, I think that
That's
my
not
dad.
A feeling. That's not a feeling. You may be describing some obscure mental process, but that's not a feeling.
Sorry, I wasn't allowed to feel for most of my life.
No, I know.
It's awful. I don't know what I'm feeling, but it hurts.
Right. Well, I imagine that there's some anger in there, right?
Yeah,